again, bringing you the hottest shit in video game. I can't even continue with that. Hey everybody, it's Slacker here, and me and Brian today, as soon as I figure out how I actually want to adjust this window, uh, are going to be watching a wee bit of The Last of Us 2. Thank you, MK Ice and Fire. And mostly we're here to talk over it because we're doing a spoiler cast, because we've never had a chance for more than one of us to really like talk about a game, and if we do in the stream, it's always kind of truncated and held back a little bit because we don't want to spoil even multi-year-old things for our audience, and we'd rather not talk about it than do that. So we are here to talk about the game in its
Yes, the
entirety.
game.
Yes,
The Last of Us Part 2. The game. The experience.
the only game to come out
Uh,
of last year. That's
if you believe the Game Awards,
yeah, it's
then yes.
boy, nothing else could have came out that was really worth talking about, so
Not at all.
oh no, go away, Twitter. I don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now. Anyway, um we're going to have this video of the actual gameplay from MK Ice and Fire. It's a commentary list, gameplay without any faces. We're a channel with like 5 viewers. If he wants to hit us with copyright, okay, make money off of us, because we don't make money in the first place. Let me see if I can full screen this and we'll continue streaming. But anyway, so I think between the two of us, overall, I loved the game and hated the story with a raging passion that I've never felt for literal anything before. But I like the game more overall, and last year was such a short year for games in the first place. This kind of made its way into my own charts. While I believe, from what I understand from you, the problems with the story far outweighed any joy with the gameplay. Am I correct in that, or?
It's yes, partially, I think. Um God, it's so hard because like the story overwhelms so much of what I took away from this game in a lot of ways, and really overshadows my place and where I land with it. Let's get the gameplay stuff out of the way. It's more Last of Us. Like it's you can there's grass now.
Mm.
You can go prone, which was fun and nice, a nice addition to the stealth mechanics there. The stealth mechanics are still good. The shooting it's better
Yeah.
than other Naughty Dog stuff. But like yeah, like playing the game itself, yeah, it just felt like I was jumping back into Last of Us, which is perfectly fine. I like this. I like the system that they developed with their style of stealth gameplay.
Mm.
Um, that being said, 30 plus hours of that weighs on you to a point where I just wanted those sections to be done,
Es-
like just done.
Especially, like,
I
to me, it felt like they learned the wrong lessons from The Last of Us 1, and as well as spoiling The Last of Us 2, like, The Last of Us 1 is going to be spoiled inherently because everything that happens in The Last of Us 2 necessarily goes back to The Last of Us 1. We're watching a cutscene that retells, in far better graphics, what happened in The Last of Us 1. Joel takes Ellie to this hospital ran by a splinter group called the Fireflies that wants to find a vaccine to cure the plague that is taking over the world in part one. And at the end of it, Joel decides for you that he is going to shoot all of the doctors and then shoot his way out back out of the hospital because they are going to kill Ellie. So that's the major crux of the story to begin with.
mean, yeah, it basically picks up right where the first almost right where the first game leaves off.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
couple
like
of years they clearly went around for a while, lived in a major city before settling in this small, like, chunk of rural area where they can all get together, and they have a great team of people that go out and keep the zombies away from them. So that's,
yeah,
where they've been. It's been calm for the last few years since for them.
yeah, relatively calm for the world that we're in here. I'm curious to get your take because I think a lot of some of the predilections for opinions for this game really do hinge on how they handle the ending of the first game.
Hmm.
In this, like, I'm curious, what was your take on the ending of the first game? Like, where did you land on that? On that ending, heading into this game.
So, from the ending of the first game, I kind of enjoyed having to be in the experience of a protagonist that does something you inherently don't want to do. I did not want to get Ellie back out of the hospital at the end of The Last of Us 1. So, when the game forced me to pull the trigger that started the whole collapse of the endeavor that you've been attempting to pull throughout the entire game, um, it was interesting to me in that time because it was something I had not experienced in a game before, being forced to make a judgment call based upon the character, and you understand entirely why the character is doing it that you do not want to do. And yeah, I've played role playing games where, like, you're given two options and the second option is never allowed, and you always go back to having to do the main option regardless, or if you choose the wrong option, everything dies because that's not the way the game's supposed to play. But having it play like that reminded me of, a movie, a story where you have a protagonist that is not specifically there to be likable, and while Joel throughout the first three-fourths of the game makes that likable, like, charming dad of one that lost it all face, he loses that as you progress, and you see the really, truly ugly man that is underneath all of that, and you are left with this hunk of man that can only survive in mistake.
It's a very apt way of putting it, especially considering where I was at when I opened up this game, sitting on the couch with my partner and just being like, "Yo, Joel is still a piece of shit."
Yeah.
Joel, like, is just, and like, I get why the first game ends the way it does and puts you in that place. Like, and in many ways, I think that worked a lot better for the story in that first game because, like, yeah, it's a very uncomfortable climax to a story that has a lot of juxtaposed like cynicism of the world around it with this budding uh, relationship between Joel and Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly think that the success in how well the ending of that game was received critically kind of maybe created the monster that we had to work through in Last of Us Part
Yes.
2
It's hard
because
not to see the echoes of that ending in every fucking part of The Last of Us 2.
yeah, it's like you had this one moment where this character that you were in control, you're forced to do this like unambiguously like just doom filled thing because you're not just saving Ellie in that instance, but in or killing people in that instance, you're dooming the entire world because you're killing the one person who knows how to possibly craft this vaccine.
Mm.
In the narrative, at least, he's the only one. And so you're not just like you're choosing to doom the world so you can play daddy daughter.
Yeah.
And like it's just so fucking like menacing once you like dig underneath it a bit more. And the entire second game just really wants to like explore that more,
Yeah,
which
that's
don't need 30 hours of that.
Yeah, The Last of Us 1, I feel like they took the wrong feeling from it, right? Because what was great about it was the juxtaposition of, like, there was good in the world that through cynicism and desperation got snuffed out because this one man couldn't have the life that he wanted. Nobody was allowed to have it. And
God.
that changes everything in the tone of The Last of Us 2. Before we get to the actual story, can I talk about the gameplay a bit from
Go for it.
so without normally I would try not to spoil this whatsoever, but in this game we technically have a dual protagonist situation and they are at qualms with each other. We have Ellie here, and as she develops through the game, despite having very similar setup to how Joel plays in the original The Last of Us, Ellie is more of a survivalist hunter type, right? She is her gameplay tends to be more sneaky and crafty. You are going to experience far more often crawling through the tall brush and using that to sneak up on your enemies, to kill them instantly and drag them out. You're not really going to get into many big gunfights using Ellie's mechanic. Diametrically opposed is the character Abby, which we'll get into her story later, but despite having the same gameplay style and element of as Ellie, when you play with her, she is definitely more the Marine type, run and gun situation type game. You are going to way more often use your big, heavy weapons as Abby in order to make it through. That was part of my problem when I first started playing Abby. When you get to it, is that I was still trying to play Abby like Ellie, where Abby, um, like the bow and arrow was amazing for Ellie. It was a one shot kill that was very easy to pull off silently. From a distance, it was game changing, and then trying to use that as Abby, it is almost useless. um, you've definitely got to get that run and gun attitude in with Abby. You are a machine, you are a Marine, you are a stone cold killer when you play as that tank of a woman. And that's part of what made me love the game was that dynamic and characterization through the gameplay aspects.
I'm with you on how they separated out the play styles between the two. Like I really like that because it plays into some of the stuff that they were doing in the first game as well. Like
Mm,
the very short time that you did control Ellie in that game is the exact same like loadout and play style that you would do um, with Ellie in this game. You
mm,
know, you have your switchblade, and then you have your stealth stuff, and that bow and arrow is the most formidable weapon that you get a hold of really when it comes to taking out people.
mm,
And then Abby feels very much mapped onto Joel from the first game. I mean, to the point where like she can craft shivs, which Ellie has never been able to do. And she's very much more takes more damage, I would say, and she's much more of a offense first um, type character in that way. So I like, and it works as well whenever you look at some of the story stuff. Like whenever you see Abby in her story as she goes on her journey and learns and kind of accepts this relationship with Lev that starts to kind of mirror the Joel Ellie, or at least in some places has been compared to the Joel Ellie relationship from the first game.
mm.
It makes sense that Abby would take on that sort of role, not just in character, but also in terms of gameplay as well. So in that instance, it's a good carryover in characterization there.
Yeah, it does very much hit me that Ellie starts becoming increasingly the Joel character as she progresses through the story. And as you unlock more abilities that allow her to be more silent, to be more deadly, Ellie progressively feels grosser to play as the game goes on. You start realizing what a horrible little killing machine you are against these waves of just regular fucking people that decided to take up arms for what they believe in, which is a whole nother thing.
We'll get to that because
Yeah.
that's a whole separate conversation about the dichotomy of motivations here between all the different characters, and honestly some of the questionable elements of those motivations.
Yeah, the
Hooray!
absolutely questionable ass motivations in this game. Holy shit. So, we'll get back to the story now. As you can see, what is actually playing out here in real time, and again, thank you, MK Ice and Fire. I know I didn't ask you to let us put this in, but if you want to, claim the monetary for this on YouTube, you'll get like 4 or 5 more hits on top of your 3 million. Go ahead. It's our fuck up. I understand that. Anyway. uh, so in the very beginning, you are in this small town, and a lot of small town drama unfolds. And at first, it is just small town drama, right? It is, hey, at the bar last night, one of your friends who was dating another one of your friends decides to open mouth kiss you in front of everyone else. A stranger drops a slur directly at you, and your dad decides to go punch the asshole in the face, and you didn't want him to defend you. That is what happens that night. We don't see it actually happen because what actually happens there doesn't specifically matter. We see bits of it as you go through the game because each part of it, it's not what actually happens there, but why the people felt the feeling going on what happened is the crux of the game. And that's kind of your beginning basically, is this just this small town drama going on. As you can see, your friend here does not blame you for his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, whatever, getting drunk and deciding to kiss you, the character player, whatever.
No, and real quick, I do want to go back to that opening cinematic, honestly, with Joel and Ellie from I think 4 years ago
Mm.
in story. Um, Clearly there's some doubt in Ellie about Joel's story, and I like this sort of like kind of strained relationship they have from the very beginning of it. So much so that Joel tries to like win her over in the moment by singing a song that literally has the lyric, "If I were to lose you, I would lose a piece of me,"
Mm.
which, spoiler alert, foreshadowing thematic stuff.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
a lot of from the interviews that I've seen, a lot of the cues and what happens comes from specific song choices they use throughout the game that made them, that I wouldn't say made them, but inspired them to make certain choices in how the storyline plays out because they're thematic to the songs that they were listening to at the time, including the Pearl Jam song that has basically become synonymous with this game at that point.
Yeah, I do like how some of that stuff ties in there in the way, even if it is a little bit ham-fisted, um, at times. That being said, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the kind of setup for the modern day story here with Jesse and Ellie going out on patrol. Ellie just kind of flippantly throwing out there is like, "Are you coming to talk to me because I made out with Dina last night?" And like Dina and Jesse have been broken up and very on again, off again for a while apparently.
Mm.
And this is like burgeoning romance there, and between Ellie and Dina, which honestly kind of feeds into probably the most positive elements of the story
Mm-hmm.
in this game. But at the same time, it all kind of spawns out of a moment at the dance where we learn later, much later on in the game, you actually see the scene play out. Um, that that
What?
basically you had the man in town in basically hurl um homophobic slur
Mm,
in the moment. But not just that, like literally like calling this like telling them like don't do that, it's a family event,
yeah.
that sort of thing. It flies in the face of what they want to what they want to portray Jackson as.
Mm,
I think a lot of this game kind of hinges around Jackson being like a sort of utopia
mm,
in a lot of ways. It's a burgeoning society. They have electricity. They have everybody has like homes. There's not like the so many other situations that you saw in the first game as well as in this game where like people are having to hole up wherever they can and just survive wherever they can do. This is a community, but it's a community that still harbors a lot of ridicule and sort of
So,
centrist to conservative values in a way that it, it really feels off base in a lot of ways.
I know.
yeah,
Um,
considering, and like Coop said in the very beginning, right? Like, the boyfriend is very much like, okay, yeah, we're broken up. It's not like you two have proposed or anything. She's free to go off and do whatever the hell she wants to. I'm kind of pissed off at her at the moment, but that has nothing to do with you two.
yeah, but it just carries a very an attitude of like it's fine as long as we don't see it.
Mhm,
And you see a lot of that come up later on in the game too with other characters and other communities.
mhm.
And it just kind of has this overbearing feeling of not necessarily advancing anything like the world that the utopian world that we want to create in Jackson is one where like yo be gay but don't show it to us, and that can extend to so many other things when it comes to the growth of a society.
Yeah, I feel
um
like the cynicism of The Last of Us 1 didn't really wash away with The Last of Us 2. And
oh, not at all. It's
yeah,
heightened.
yeah, the cynicism towards, how can humanity continue to be humanity, right? And that the fact that this town, underneath the charming veneer where literally every fucking house you walk into it has a 52-inch plasma TV with a PS3 hooked up to it, because you gotta remember the world in it in 2005 or so. Uh, yeah, so like, oh yeah, everyone has every book they could ever want now, because there's 50 different libraries. You can just walk in and pick up shit. But like the further you dig under that surface, the grosser it is, and in parts, it doesn't make a lot of sense in some of the places. And yeah, the one rude dude who spouts some ultra conservative bullshit
Sure.
in Jackson is a symptom of the overall curse that the game, I think, is trying to speak to about humanity, but fails to do so in a way that feels earned.
Okay.
No, not at all. And it feeds a lot into I think how the relationship between Ellie and Dina grows because like on one hand, like the what we see from them like going on patrol all the way into Seattle is
I appreciate
very
that.
much a very authentic representation of a burgeoning
Bigger
relationship, queer or
sandwiches.
otherwise.
Mm,
And it's the most
They're yours.
human part of the game to me, outside of some of the stuff in Abby's
You like your
story.
outfit?
mm,
And and it was really well done. I really liked that stuff. I really liked how they built that relationship up over time, and even to the point where like they're talking about getting Dina wanting to have the farmhouse and just basically live separate from Jackson. Like I don't blame her.
no.
Like I know that it's framed as this idea of you know more of a serenity sort of thing or
Mm,
and that sort of stuff, or like a pie in the sky sort of thing. But it very very many ways it has this underlying of we know that this community, the people that do outwardly show hate towards our relationship, um other people in this community, the leadership in this community thinks that that is all going to be apologized away by some dude making us steak sandwiches and saying sorry, and that's not going to fucking cut it.
No.
So yeah, like in that way it informs at least subtextually a lot of that relationship as it continues to blossom and grow, and then ultimately go the route that it does go. Fuck.
Yeah, and don't mind me when I talk through this. I'm so horrible with names. I'm going to drop names like the brother, the girlfriend, the boyfriend, and that's kind
No
of how
worries.
my mind picks up on these characters. I know Dino is a much, bigger character, or Dina, than the game lays out here, but I forget names, so
Honestly, Dina should have been a much larger character, even for what the game does give her.
yeah,
I'm just gonna put that out there.
because a thing just happens to her, and we'll get more into that, I'm sure, when we get to it. But just a thing just fucking happens, and you're like, what? I do
Yep.
like this part of the game, by the way, where you're introduced to the gameplay with the snowball fights. I know other games have done exactly, literally this before. I'm looking at you, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. But still, it is cute and endearing way to draw you into a game that is trying to give you a wholesome exterior that has something worse going on underneath everything. Neat. Thumbs up to that.
Yes.
So, Ellie and Dina, they are to go out on a patrol, basically, for the city. There are patrols every so often to make sure that there are no oncoming undead into their community, and it has so far protected them very well. They also seem to be greatly well protected from everything what is going on in the outside world beyond their area. They may see one or two undead on a patrol, often at max. Sometimes there may be a small horde, but nothing that it doesn't seem like one or two people can't handle on their own. Meanwhile, while they're... I'm sorry, did you want to throw in something else?
Oh no. Go ahead.
While they're out on this patrol as well, we switch over to Abby at a particular point. For Abby's background, she is with a friend who wants to show her something. And they look down on the city of Jackson, where everyone is at this point in the game. And Abby has a conversation with the man. Apparently, he has gotten his girlfriend pregnant. That is a huge problem for her at this point in the game. And that is a recurring thematic part of the game.
Yeah.
And, fuck it, they get over it, whatever the hell. And Abby separates from him because she's mad at him for having gotten his girlfriend pregnant while they're out on the hunt and all this shit. And she runs off on her own and gets plagued by zombies. A huge rush of them. We go back to Ellie and Dina. They too run across the bajillion zombies. But Ellie and Dina end up shacking up in the basement of a library that has been turned into a weed den for reasons.
Yo, I'm not gonna fault Eugene for setting up a grow up.
I don't have any
You
problem
need something
with
to
that.
cope with.
It's just a very awkward thing to shoehorn in. Just like, oh yeah, there is this basement full of dying weed in this library that nobody fucking knows about somehow.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I thought it was a nice little setup for them to have another moment together.
Yeah, and things
And
between the
and
two of them
release.
do escalate them there, and that's understandable because, like, hey, this is... You have unresolved tension between the two of them. Cool. Naturally progresses. I won't get over the whole weed did. Like, it keeps kicking in the back of my brain, like, if I knew that Brian was my source for hot ass weed and Brian died, I would ask myself, where the fuck did all of Brian's weed go? And maybe take a look. It wasn't even hard to find his grow den. It was underneath where he slept all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
One for you.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it just felt like edgy to work it edgy to me, and you know, it's not a bad scene. I don't fault them for that one. It just felt edgy for edgy's sake.
You all know the drill.
Anyway,
I don't know. I don't necessarily see pot as edgy, but I understand what you mean though. I understand what you mean.
You come back.
meanwhile, while Ellie and Dina are having a good time, Abby is still being overrun by all of these zombies, but she happens to run into Joel and his brother, who are also out at patrol at the same time. And while she runs across them, they all get to the safety of where Abby's team is. Only to find out that Abby's team had been here literally the whole time to hunt Joel and nothing else. I didn't know at first this is where the controversy was, because I played this part of the game pretty immediately, and then just, like, I didn't want to go back to it after I was done with the first part of Seattle, because, like, I just didn't feel like misery and gloom in the middle of last summer.
Yeah.
But... so, of course, they torture and kill Joel. Joel is a shitbag. Why is anybody mad that Joel dies? I know he's the lead character, but shit.
Well, see, here's the thing, though. At this point, we don't know what Ellie knows. We don't know if she understands what happened in Salt Lake City, if she understands what Joel did.
Right.
And so I can totally understand, you know, seeing that there being like maybe not fully like feeling the same motivation, but understanding the motivation for you know, Ellie's response to this in this moment.
No, I understood Ellie's response to it in the moment. I didn't understand it later, but at that time, Ellie's response was perfect. To be mad about her father figure dying. We didn't know the full juxtaposition of everything, but, like, how many people in the very first game did Joel piss the fuck off?
Where have you been?
Yep.
Yeah, so Joel dying wasn't exactly, like, the peak of surprise to me.
What?
Trust me.
No, but it is like definitely the route this game was going to take.
Yeah.
You know, now granted, I didn't necessarily completely foresee the full extent
Come on.
of Abby's background, like knowing that she is the daughter of the doctor.
Yeah.
Like that, like obviously, like there was a lot of things playing into this. Where like, yeah,
You don't wanna do this when the sun's out?
Fireflies or ex-Fireflies
Rumor?
are probably going to be pissed
Yeah.
about Joel shooting up their hospital and
And you don't
killing
want
the
this
one
to
person who had the chance to make a cure for this thing.
Yeah. There was a huge reason for people to be pissed off at Joel if they found out. And goddamn, he murdered like 50 people to escape that hospital.
Doing
He's
wonders
probably
for
going to
us.
leave at least a little bit of evidence.
Been restless.
Yeah.
You too.
So, yeah, like, it wasn't like, it wasn't that I expected him to die,
I've thought about it.
but like,
You can see my
I
hands.
wasn't exactly amazed by the fact that he dies early into the game. I was amazed. So Abby and the girlfriend, or Ellie and the girlfriend, find out that Joel is missing, and go on the hunt, and eventually find where Joel and his brother have been kidnapped, and Joel is murdered directly in front of Ellie after he has obviously been tortured for hours.
You stop being weird. You're freaking me out.
Yeah. It's a jarring scene.
The torture is definitely a bit gratuitous, which I think was part of what made me not really feel it in the moment.
What? No.
But
Yeah.
it's understandable what they're trying to get through, even if it is gruesome. Like, this guy basically doomed the entire world.
Clearly.
I could understand being a little mad,
You'll be fine.
It's too high.
even without the direct reference. Also, this game has the best snow I've ever seen in my entire fucking life.
Yeah, but here's the thing about Abby's motivation for that for me. I think that it probably would have been more effective
Owen,
personally
go back this way?
Consider it
if
an opportunity to work
we
on your
didn't have
How about I work
the
my foot
backstory,
fast?
like the personal connection there, because it seems like that supersedes anything involving like how Joel's actions affected the world proper.
Yeah,
Like it seems like
it's
the main reason why she's there to do this is because you killed my dad. So now I'm gonna I'm gonna
I'm going to
make
kill
Ellie
your
watch.
dad because you killed
Yes,
my dad.
exactly. So like in that way, like it was a little bit frustrating.
Maybe.
But at the same time, like
Holy shit.
justice is justice, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and you don't realize in the first 3 hours how much they are actually setting up. Like, because I will give them credit. The first 3 hours is really good
You see it first.
in that it is a lot of setup done very naturally, and things that you don't expect to matter later in the game come back from this few hours.
They have electricity,
Yeah.
guns.
So there's no, like, Chekhov's gun here incident. Everything flows very naturally at the beginning of the game.
Okay.
And if the game was like the first 6 hours or so, this would have been a masterpiece, best game of the year to me. And then it went for another 30 hours.
Find a way to clear 'em out.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if I would have
Information.
put it that high just off the first 6 hours personally, but like I understand like this and the opening of Seattle are
Okay, what do
two
you
of the better parts of the game, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're the
what is
it's
going
hard
on?
because like I really like some of the Abby story um just as much as I like some of the stuff between Ellie and Dina
Mhm.
in the first half. So it's hard for me to
Okay.
really like
It's not just that.
choose one or the other when it comes to that. But
Everything else is just the
yeah, we have our inciting incident here, and obviously all of this stuff
We can do this.
sets everything in motion, and you know the crew from the WLF here, they leave Ellie alive, even though I think both Mel and Manny want to just kill her too. But like Abby
Don't.
and Owen are like, no, like we came here to kill Joel, and we killed Joel, so we're just gonna leave her alive. And obviously that's going to come back later on multiple times in the game as well.
Yep.
So and kind of plays into this idea of wasted opportunity
Yeah, when
that's
when
pointed out later on.
Joel's daughter and brother are both left fully alive, somehow they don't expect any of this to ever come back to them or anything. Like, hey, we're even now. You murdered my family, I murdered yours. We're copacetic now, right, bro? I left you alive.
Well, see, here's the thing. Ellie and Tommy don't ever learn that
Nope.
Abby's dad was the surgeon. They don't ever learn that. Even at the climax, I mean, one of the multiple climaxes of this game, like that information is never communicated between the two of them. So, like in this instance, like to Ellie and Tommy, these are just people associated with the Fireflies.
Yeah, so I understand
Or
him.
they don't even know that necessarily.
I understand why they go after Abby at this part of the game. But, like, why Abby just, like, fucking leaves it? Like, alright, you two, fuck off. I got what I came for.
Well, I think because it plays into the one of the major like thematic clashes in terms of motivations that the game wants to try and communicate to players between Abby and Ellie is the idea of justice versus vengeance.
Right.
In Abby's mind, she is seeking justice against Joel.
Yeah, and her
Ellie,
justice in every part is so fucking stupid.
I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you there, but there is at least like this semblance of justice in that she doesn't want to just kill everyone. She
And,
want that Joel is the goal. I'm gonna kill Joel, and like I'm fine with leaving these other people alive because they weren't part of this. Like the only person that wronged me was this, and that's the person who I'm seeking justice against. Whereas Ellie, instead of just like mirroring the same concept, even though I would, it's definitely not justice when it comes to Ellie in my mind.
no.
But instead of mirroring that sort of motivation that Abby has and just going after Abby, no, Ellie's there to fucking murder everyone.
God damn it, we're not getting this in an hour. We're gonna have to do this again next week, aren't we?
Probably, but I mean, there's a lot to unpack
Yeah.
with this thing, honestly. Even though there's
True.
so much disappointing from it, but no, like it just goes to this larger conversation in terms of like exactly how they represent motivations in the characters. And I totally understood that whenever it came to Abby's choice, is like it makes sense for her in that she just wants to rid the world of Joel out of
Yeah.
you know this sense of justice that she feels.
And I
um
guess like justice versus vengeance is a very strong thing. And not only that, that both of them can be very perverse and wrong at the same time because every step Abby makes horrible mistakes, not even just with Ellie, but with everyone around her so much.
I mean, yeah, yes. In some ways, I completely agree with you on that. I think it's much more egregious when it comes to Ellie.
Oh yeah.
But yes, the concepts of justice and vengeance are both somewhat perverted in terms of how they're represented in this world. But then again, so much about the world that The Last of Us is creates is perverse when it comes to these sort of concepts, or really any concept. I mean, we just got done talking about like Jackson as like being framed as this like bastion in the midst of a zombie laden world in the middle of Wyoming, which I think is the first time that the words bastion and Wyoming have been in the same sentence. No offense to anybody living in Wyoming. Um, but
How do I get out of here?
even then, like that idea of this being like the stable community that was the closest thing that can resemble life before the apocalypse still has so many deep-seated prejudices and deep-seated conceits when it comes to exactly how you define a welcoming community. You know,
I feel
there's
like
so much perversion throughout all of this game in that way.
can we talk about the timeline then that happens in Seattle and how ridiculous this timeline is? Not
Yeah,
support to Ellie and Abby.
I'm
Just
sure we can get into that.
before everything that happens in the game. I guess the next time we'll cover Seattle, but Seattle is the majority of the game, and we'll cover all of everything else next time. But let's talk about the history of Seattle. So the zombie invasion happens. The government comes in and tries its best to ration, but people, both in those who are representing the government and those who the government are supposed to be protecting,
Okay,
start getting
close.
into disagreements with each other. The government people want to be the shepherds who herd everyone, and we always do what's right, and there's not enough resources for absolutely everyone, so we can't let absolutely everyone come in here, and those who are here, we must ration very carefully because we don't know how long this will last, which is logical. The government does seem to go into some very extremes here. So there is the liberation of Seattle that seems to take place
Quote
at some
unquote.
point. God, Seattle is so fucked in this game. So the people rise up against the government and overthrow the government and make their own government in Seattle, which, oh, that's, I don't even want to talk of reality versus video games in that. But yeah, and of course the leaders who start leading in Seattle, though maybe better when they had, are also kind of shitlords.
Well, here's the thing. It's not even necessarily that they're better than what they had, honestly. It's that, um, let's be real. Fedra, based off of how they were characterized in the first game and a lot of the anecdotes that we get around the fall of Seattle throughout the messages that you find
Hmm.
um, in the city. Fedra is a bad actor here. I mean, Fedra is
Yeah,
basically like they are um, while it's definitely understandable that they're rationing food because resources are being depleted and they're not allowing anyone else into the Seattle zone
hmm,
there. Like, yeah, it's frustrating and also somewhat of a necessity, but at the same time it takes on a very different connotation than I think just simply them trying to do what's best for the cause.
true.
But then the Washington Liberation Front, the WLF, um, the group that overthrows this, overthrows Fedra in Seattle. I mean, as soon as they take over, like the mask comes off. Like they are fucking fascist.
Yeah, and a lot of people are happy, but some very much aren't. And a resistance to the resistance takes place.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I'm assuming you're talking about the Seraphites in
Yeah,
that instance, right? So
yeah,
the Seraphites existed before the fall of Fedra, though. They
yeah.
existed before the wolves took control of the city. I mean, you see that in one of the messages where it basically a Fedra officer says like, "Well, they took over the city. They're killing all of us. I guess the religious fanatics are their problem now." So clearly, the
Yep.
Seraphites existed before all this happened. Also, we'll get into more about like, oh my God, there's a lot of stuff around the framing of the wolves and the Seraphites in this game.
Yeah,
Jesus
the
Christ.
Seraphites are framed as a religious cult, and the vast majority of the people and the religion in it seems to be very awkwardly quasi Asian sort of Buddhist sort of thing.
Oh, that's it. I have
It's
an article for you to read before we talk about that next week because I think you need to read it before we talk about it next week because it's
sure.
definitely religious fanaticism, but um, on a different wavelength, I think. and
Uh,
and honestly, like it's something that I read into before I read the article.
uh,
But um,
the wolves basically look at them as subhuman, grotesque things, and want nothing to do with them at first, from what I understand. And then a woman who was like, they're basically one of the most outspoken people in their group who had, the most ideas and was the most inspirational, ended up dying during this large incident where they were supposed to make peace. Keep in mind this was a few months ago updated, so am I off here?
no, you're not off. There was a woman who lived in the Seattle area. I can't remember her name because they don't
It
really
doesn't
go that
matter.
much into her background. I mean, it does matter in some ways for me personally. I would have liked more backstory on that because they go so far into explaining how the WLF like took over Seattle and the workings of the WLF and that sort of thing. And then the Seraphites, their whole backstory is just that they're religious zealots who like glorify martyrdom.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
that's so derivative and frustrating for a game that wants to like pride itself on character building and storytelling that they're just going to be like, well, this group, they swore off technology and they are willing to sacrifice themselves for this fight, and that's not a good like foundation for your character building. But anyway, I digress. So yes, the woman who ends up like leading the Seraphites, it ends up getting killed, um, and that happens at a point where there's a truce between the two groups, and that obviously sparks a new round of fighting, and gets to the point that we're at now. Whenever we get to Seattle, and we learn more about the conflict between the WLF and the Seraphites.
Yeah, and when I said that it doesn't matter what her name is, it doesn't seem to matter to literally fucking anybody, even the Seraphites themselves. She was just, as far as they seem to be concerned, a martyr to place their flag upon, rather than a person with their own needs, wants, desires, etc. Just became this embodiment of culture rather than a fucking person.
Which feeds into the idea of the glorification of martyrdom.
Hmm.
You know, that's basically what she's like. I'm sure, like, and that's what frustrates me about like not learning more about her, because like, yes, like she founded a religion that ended up turning into what we see now as this like very abrasive, ultra violent cult that constantly feuds with the other ultra violent cults. Because I mean, I'm just gonna call it like I see it. WLF also a cult in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, but like but not having that proper backstory, you lose out a lot on the actual person, and all you're left with is this idea of the martyr, this idea of the image that her followers have created, and I think you dehumanize that person in doing that, and basically feed into this idea that the Seraphites should be dehumanized as well. Because if they just blindly like, excuse me real quick,
Of course.
they just blindly worship this person, and then but you don't really understand why, and you see some of that come up in conversations between Abby and Lev also.
Hmm.
You know, where Abby's like, you know, your teaching, your religious teachings are all about violence and terrorism and stuff like that, and Lev's like, well, have you actually read the book? Have you actually read the scriptures? And
Yeah,
I'm pretty, and
because
I think he also says that like, you know, if she was still here, she would not approve of what's happening
hmm.
right now. So like, it was a personal frustration for me because they spent so much time building out all these other characters in this game, that they did not really gave backstory to so many different elements of what's happening in Seattle, that was one where they were just like, maybe we don't need to go into that much, and it just fed into the dehumanization of the group as a whole.
So we don't even have to get into the rest of the game to, with all of this information here, understand why the story of the game pissed me off so much. Because everyone sucks and everyone dies. There is no decent person in this entire fucking game other than maybe the boyfriend, who also dies. They all suck. All of them. Every single person. And they all have dumb motivations.
I hmm
I hate
I
everyone's
think
motivation so hard.
I'll get that's a complicated one to get into, and we only have 5 minutes left, so I might save. Let me just the quick version, and then maybe I'll give the more in-depth version later from where I'm at with that. There are certainly characters that suck.
Mm.
There are multiple characters in this game that suck, but the important thing when it comes to storytelling is like, what journey do those characters go on? What growth do they experience throughout? Yes, there are many characters that are very one note, and they're frustratingly one note, because usually that one note is along either a racial or religious or some other like identity that only um, that basically becomes like the one note that defines them in a way, and it feeds off of stereotypes in that way. But there are multiple characters that do go through journeys in this game, and some of them are, in my opinion, like really well done.
Mm.
Some of them are immensely frustrating. But then there are some characters that honestly, like I didn't really feel a sucky vibe off of any of them. Like most notably Dina. Like Dina's the one character in this
Yeah.
game that start to finish, I just didn't really get that feeling. And the only real time of frustration that I have with Dina came from the way that she was written, which I can talk more about
Yeah.
that later on. But I
Yeah.
understand why you feel that way because like there's a lot of messaging in the game that kind of frames everything like, yes, everyone sucks.
Dina
Like
isn't
there,
herself a bad person, but what we get into very quickly when we get into Seattle with her just pissed me off to a very high end. Um, that that oh, fuck it, that she fucking went on this whole fucking mission and didn't tell anyone that she knows she's pregnant.
and why? How did that strike you?
Um, kind of shitty. Like, she wanted to be close to Ellie through this whole thing, but she had to know that her being pregnant, even if Ellie never fucking found out, even if she never, like, had real sickness feelings from it, like, would have kept her from doing a lot of the extraordinarily physical thing, like hiking from Wyoming to Seattle and back.
Oh, from old age. Like living a long
I
life.
mean, I'll be upfront. Like, just because a woman is pregnant does not mean that they can't do like physical stuff like this,
It doesn't
especially
mean that
like
they
when you're only a
can't,
couple
but that
months.
is something you talk about and plan for first rather than dropping it in the very middle. That I might have a physical ailment that is going to stop me from being able to pull out the mission that we are even here for.
Well, see, what frustrated me about that was the fact that Ellie immediately framed Dina as a burden.
That too.
Immediately framed Dina as like, oh, well, you didn't tell me. Well, like, fuck you. You're a hamper on this now. Like that frustrated me because like, from Dina's perspective, like she was willing to put herself next to you on this mission, regardless of how she was feeling. And once again, I reiterate, like pregnancy affects people differently.
Mm.
But the fact that this game frames her as like, well, you're pregnant, so you're useless at this point.
Yeah, that was fucking dumb as shit. And not only that, but throughout the whole thing, like, Ellie suddenly makes Dina something that has to be protected at all cost. She is not another human being with her own ability. At that second that it comes out, Dina goes from a strong, capable, interesting character to background fodder for you to be worried about and protect. That is all that she is anymore, is something that you have to worry about and protect because Ellie keeps saying so over and over and over again.
And that's a crime of the writing of this game because like Dina could definitely have still contributed in this instance, even with being pregnant, like I said before. Like that, there's no reason why that had to be done other than just like some kind of contrivance in
Yeah,
my mind.
yeah, she
And it's
could have.
frustrating as hell because like a lot of the messaging around like the value of women in the society, you don't really see that really addressed by a lot of people until you realize that they like, oh, we're reminded that they can bear children. um, and like women have more value than that
Yeah,
in
and
this
every
world.
pregnant woman in the story is literally dropped down to the moment you know they're pregnant as the bearer of future children and nothing else.
Not to mention the fact that we see later on in the game that pregnant women can actually do a lot of this stuff. Whenever you have Mel in running around with Abby and Manny,
Yeah,
like there's
all
no reason why there's no reason why Dina had to play that role.
all Dina had to do was mention this before we take off. Hey, I'm pregnant. You know, if something happens, if there is something really bad that goes on, I get sick or something, I can sit out, but, 90% of the chances I'll be here to help and protect you. It's not a big deal, but that she holds it back and it
Well, here's
becomes
the
a big
thing.
deal.
Well, here's the thing. It's very likely that she didn't know she was pregnant until they were in the middle of the journey to Washington. Like I think it's actually brought up in the dialogue. Like when did you like start feeling sick? And she's like sometime in Idaho.
Oh,
So like she's already committed to this before knowing that she's pregnant. So like any idea that she should have said something beforehand just kind of goes out the window to me. I don't have a problem with her holding on to that information until Seattle personally. I my issue is how Ellie treats her after that and how the game treats her after that.
that is the
Because
other curse of the writing in this game. They're in Jackson. Boom, they're in Seattle.
I was fine with that, honestly.
I didn't need
Like I'm fine with skipping the 2-month hike.
Yeah, I didn't need to do the 2 month hike, but give me a montage. Give me 2 months later. They just give you Seattle. And I have no idea, other than a few of Ellie's notes in her scrapbook, that anything might have happened on this journey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're at time,
Yeah.
and we've just got to see.
No, I think we can get the rest of this in here, but next week I think we can cover the rest of it because I think we've covered the major breeding ground for our grievances with the game. So we can get into the actual grievances as they happen through the story of the game.
Yeah, there's plenty. I mean, really, once you get to Seattle is where a lot of the stuff that really irked me about the game starts happening, and so we'll get there.
Yeah, it's literally at the part where you find out that Dina is pregnant that suddenly I start hating the game. Or at least the way the story is told of the game. Up until that point, I don't think I had any problems. And then it takes a sharp turn into fucking why did they do that? Any shit. Yeah, we'll do this again next week. I fully believe we can finish this the rest of the story off in one go because we've already set all the base ground for the story and our problems with the parts of the story, so we can just go through all the parts of it. Thanks everyone for listening, Coop, for joining us. Next week is 2 hours of just yelling at Mike saying, "Fucking why?" Yes, indeed. All right. I look forward to doing this again next week. Good night, everybody.
Bye.